might have to start a little bit later today. It's usually, oh, here people are joining now.
All good.
Can we one of the attendees, can you ask a question so I can post the link to the YouTube video? Don't see a way to do it as panelist. We'll be getting started here. Yep, thank you. Okay, I posted a link. I think Anthony was first. All right. Yeah, so I think we'll give everyone a few minutes here to join, but hope everybody's doing well. Happy January.
Pronote me.
Bobby, you are not muted. I don't know if you.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah. Hey.
Oh, cool.
It's working.
I can't start video.
Oh, yeah. Let me make people.
Probably also can't present.
Make co-hosts. Okay, everybody's co-hosts.
Sweet.
So the Zoom is for like the live video. We use the YouTube chat for I think Mike. I'm answering Mike's question from YouTube here. So we use YouTube for the live chat because we just had issues, with moderation of Zoom chat. and the video there is I think it's accessible after we end the stream, but we don't edit it. So Chris in Atlanta PHP will release an edited version of these merge PHP events. But he'll tell you more about that. Also, it looks like I'm chatting as myself, not Austin Tech Videos, but I guess you guys will figure it out on YouTube. How's your January been so far, Bobby?
Pretty good. It was kind of eventful, but you know.
Yep. Kind of crazy politically, but yeah.
It's performance review time. That's always terrible, but
oh yeah,
I had a birthday there, so it kind of balances out.
Fun work stuff.
Yeah.
We actually got snow this week, and it didn't melt immediately, which is
Unusual.
Unusual, yeah. It was maybe a couple of inches. It was a ton of snow for Austin. So that was fun. I think that was Sunday. Yeah.
I spent a year in Dallas. I don't know how different it is from Dallas to Austin, but I think maybe twice there was snow and it was gone by like 7 or 8 a.m.
Yeah, Dallas gets snow pretty regularly, but I've lived here in Austin for 11 years, and it's only maybe like 2 or 3 times.
Yeah, according to my phone, we had snow here today. I didn't see it myself, but
looks like we've got some people figuring out the Zoom stuff. Welcome, Mike from Ohio.
Bailey says, hello, I am new. Hi, Bailey. Welcome to Merge PHP.
Yeah, so I made you co-host, Dan, and we'll get started here very shortly. But just be careful on unmuting or giving attendees permissions. So we had some bad experiences last year with just giving everybody normal Zoom permissions. So, yep,
Thanks for letting me know.
yep. Awesome. We've got somebody from Egypt. Well, I think everybody's here. I suppose we should double check. Chris is ready. Oh, you unmuted, but was that you're ready?
Oh, I said, yep.
Okay. Cool.
Am I going first?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, thumbs up for Bobby. Go ahead and start now, or
Yeah, I think we're good to go. Do you want to do the intro stuff and then pass it over to Bobby, and I'll go third?
Let's get my tab ready. That's the here. Okay, you got my opening slide.
Yep.
Well, welcome everybody. I'm Chris Bruck, representing Atlanta PHP of this combo group here. Just a few things to mention. Slide not advancing. We'd just like to thank our video sponsor, Variux.com. One of our members, David Edmondson, runs a Magento integration shop here locally, and really does a lot of great work with that. So if you have any Magento needs, I can get you in touch with him. Um, just a couple quick things to also mention upcoming events. The PHP CC group over in Germany consists of Sebastian Bergman, Arnold Blankertz, and Stefan Priest. Is having an online conference January 18th through the 22nd. Some of that is workshop days. It's not like 5 straight days talks, but that's coming up online. You can still register for that. So a lot of good stuff. I know there's some PHP unit specific stuff there, thanks to Sebastian. And all those guys are really good presenters, great developers, and so forth. So that'd be definitely worth checking out. Just a quick mention, we always like to mention Longhorn. I'll let Logan fill us in more on that, since that's his baby, but among other people. But that's still on for May as far as we know. And also just want to mention Refactor.tech here in Atlanta. It's a polyglot conference with an emphasis on diversity and inclusion and things like that. So they have a variety of technical talks as well as more of the software skills and software topics. That's coming up September this year. So as far as we know, that's still working. And my dog is going off here. Sorry. Also, just to mention, as Logan mentioned, we video record and keep an archive at our non-meetup site, atlantaphp.org. So we also have a Google group message forum for job postings and discussion, pretty low traffic. So dive right in if you want to start something. Also, you can see here we've got our video tab. That's our archive of all our talks going back to all but a couple going back to 2012. So if you miss any more of these in the future, we'll have them all there. So check it out. I think that's all I got. So I'll hand it off to Bobby.
Sorry, when I share my screen, the button to unmute went from the bottom of my one screen to the top of another screen, so I couldn't talk. Took a minute to find it. Okay, so I'm Bobby Cahill. I'm one of the lead organizers of Boston PHP, and I'm just going to run through our usual slide deck somewhat quickly so we can get on with the meeting. But we're based on Meetup. Go to Boston PHP, search for Boston PHP on Meetup, or you use this link. We are on Twitter. We tweet announcements for each of the meetings, usually like a week or two beforehand on Twitter. Also on Facebook, we have a private user group. It's private to prevent spamming. So if you just add us and you don't have a really shady looking account, we'll just immediately accept you. It's not like you need to know people to get in. Also, we have a LinkedIn group. We announce on all three of those places. We've been around since 2002. We've had this is my estimate because Meetup doesn't make it easy to see the number anymore, but I think we've had 277 meetups, and at least 210 or so have been in-person meetups. We currently have 3,840 members, and this is just a quick list of our focus points. So we're big on education, as in learning skills and technology, idea sharing, as in presenting topics to, getting speakers to talk to us about stuff, and open source. We promote these things through the in-person meetups, which is what we used to focus on. Self-study groups, which is a thing that I'll mention in a minute, that Gene, my co-organizer, runs, and then now virtual meetups. I should probably take the new tag off of that because we've been doing this for a while now. Before I mention this slide, so the virtual self-study meetups. One quick thing about that is if I'm going to try to explain it like Gene does. He does a better job, but when you come to one of these events, we do these events once a month, and it's for a couple hours. But then you go home and you learn some cool stuff at the event, you meet some people or whatever, and you go home, and then either you forget about it or maybe you use it, but then what do you do for the other 99% of the month? We provide a way to go, you join a group. The way it works is a group will pick a topic that they want to work on, and you join, and then they pick a book, and you go through the book. It's like a textbook, and you go through one chapter at a time. I think it's one chapter per week, and then you post your results online. You do the exercises in the end of the chapter and post them on the forums, and the group helps each other just with making sure they understand the subject and everything. And then when you get through the whole thing at the end, you get a acknowledgement from the Boston PHP community. Gene will, I don't know if he sends out certificates, but he may. Yeah, he might be able to. If he's on the call, he could confirm that. And then we have there's a bunch of topics. They all tend to. The original one was PHP Percolate, and then they all we have about, I want to say, 15 topics now, and they're all food based. But if you go to our meetup site, you should be able to see somewhere in there. There's a list of all the different topics that we run seasons for. And then this last slide here. Again, that's our website. And for events and general things, you can contact me. You can contact us through the site. And then for virtual self-study stuff, you can contact Gene. And that brings us to tonight's presentation, which Logan's going to introduce, so I won't talk about this slide. Go ahead.
Awesome. Thanks, Bobby and Chris. Before I do the intro stuff here, I'm going to do the intro for Austin PHP. So let me find the right screen here. It helps if I have the right tab open before I do that. All right. I suppose it would be a lot easier if I made slides. Yeah, so a little bit about Austin PHP. We're here on Meetup, Austin PHP, and then there's Austin PHP chat. There's an about page there. It has a bunch of links where you can find us online. We're the longest running tech group here in Austin, similar amount of time as Boston and Atlanta, I think, from what I remember. But we decided middle of last year to start doing these virtual events after the pandemic. I guess we were doing virtual events. We experimented with that a little bit previously, but super happy with Merge PHP and the contributions from Bobby and Chris. So looking forward to doing more of these in the future. We started a conference, a PHP conference here in Austin 3 years ago, Longhorn PHP, as Chris mentioned, and it sounds like there's no official announcement yet on the dates, but it looks like we might push that out a bit farther in 2021, but we delayed the 2020 conference into 2021 because we're dedicated to in-person events for sure, and not going to do a virtual conference. But the call for papers just ended a few weeks ago, and blind bird tickets are on sale. If you are on the YouTube chat, hit up Ian for questions. He would be better versed on what's new with Longhorn, but keep an eye on the website and sign up for updates, and we'll obviously on Twitter too would be a good place to keep an eye on that as well. And then a personal project I've been working on for the community a couple months now, I want to bring to everybody's attention. PHP Ops. It's a publication on Medium I started, and so I'm posting like top links for like DevOps, and then on a weekly basis, and then a little behind on the Laravel-based PHP links, but came up with a system for aggregating everything based on popularity, and so that has been keeping me busy, but looking for more long form content. If anybody's interested in writing for this, I think this would be a good resource for the community to help build this. So yeah, that's a little bit about us. I'm gonna swap back over here to the Dan slide, and we can officially get started. Oh, I should mention before I hit record here is the YouTube link there is for just live chatting with the community. You're welcome to ask questions on Zoom or YouTube, and then we will wait till the end and then go through the questions and then ask Dan, from those two places. So yeah, either or is fine. Don't be afraid to ask questions. I know JWT, there's a lot of complicated things that I'm sure Dan we're going to leave here an expert. So yeah, let me swap over here and then find the record button. Awesome. Welcome to Merge PHP January 2021. This month's presentation is Dan Moore. He's head of developer relations at FusionAuth as his day job. He has a blog at letterstoaNewDeveloper.com. He helps organize the Boulder Ruby meetup. He's been a developer for over 20 years now, and definitely check him out. It sounds like you've got a wide array of experience, from startups to large companies and small companies, and interested to learn some more about JWT this month. So Yeah, Dan, that it's not going to be a super long intro, so I hope you're ready.
That's great. No. Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. So I guess I'll share my screen. Does that work? How it works?
Yep.
Great. Continue. All right. Share. All right. So I trust you'll let me know if you can't hear me or whatnot. But yeah,
Audio's good.
Audio's good. Great. Thanks.
Thank you for speaking this month.
No. Thank you for having me. I also am a meetup organizer for the Boulder Ruby meetup, and I know. I guess I'll just put a quick pitch in. If anyone wants to speak, it's a great way to learn things and a great way to serve your community. So highly recommend reaching out to these organizers and volunteering to speak. So let's jump into the topic of the day, which is JWTs, or they're sometimes called JOTs. But real quick, I hate pitchware. This is the only slide that's going to be about Fusion Auth the entire presentation. So I just want to get through it. We are a drop-in user data store, something like Auth0 or Okta, except you can run us locally if you want. We have multiple different editions, including one that's forever free called the Community Edition. And that's a full-featured auth system which supports multiple different OAuth grants, SAML, passwordless, MFA, and more. And how that's germane to this presentation is that we produce a whole lot of JOTs. That's one of the key things that our software builds. So real quick about me, thank you for that intro, Logan. Who cares? You didn't come here to learn about Dan Moore. You came here to learn about JOTs. Questions, as Logan mentioned, save till the end. Please do, organizers, let me know if I lag. I've definitely lagged in the past. And, Netflix is probably running in other people's houses at this time. So let's jump to the topic. JSON Web Tokens, they are pronounced JOT. It is a IETF standard. And the problem they really solve is they provide a standardized way to have a stateless portable token of identity. And because they're stateless and portable, they're great for APIs, but you can also use them for other situations. They are produced by a lot of identity providers. So if you have a central identity store, sometimes you want to be able to authenticate someone there and then hand off something that client can hold and present to other places and say, well, this client has been authenticated. So they tend to be used as bearer tokens in that format, which has some security ramifications that we'll talk about a little bit later. So we're going to kind of walk through a scenario of a service-oriented architecture. This is not a monolithic application. It's an application where you have a couple of different APIs. You have your clients over here, you have APIs, and then you have your data stores. So a slightly larger application than you might be starting off with, but this is where JWTs and distributed identity really shine. So the user API looks pretty typical. You have users, you have roles, and it's fronted by that API. And the to-do API just has to-dos. Those to-dos, the data store of those to-dos might look a little bit something like this, a to-dos table, and it has an ID, text to store the to-do, and then some kind of user ID that may be an int, maybe something else, but is a key to tell us whose to-dos this user, whose to-dos are stored in this particular row. So how the application might work is the client might post to an endpoint in the user API, and that endpoint will verify that the credentials match. Typically, this is a username or password, but it could be something else too. And then hand back some data, right? User 42 is turned into JSON and passed back to the client. That data might look a little bit something like this, right? It has an ID, a name, other information like an email, a role, business specific information. Then what happens next is the client says, okay, cool. I'm going to pass this. I'm going to extract the user ID from the JSON. I'm going to pass that to the to-do API. And and I'm gonna pass in this user ID, and it's gonna hand me back all of Dan Moore's to-dos. Hopefully this isn't too long, and then I'm gonna display those, right? Maybe with a checkbox so that I can mark them as done or whatnot. But there's a problem with this, and some of you may have already seen it, but the issue is that a malicious client can notice that the user ID is an integer and say, that's really interesting. I wonder what user ID 1, what their to-dos are, or 2 or 3. And so it's a very naive implementation to just pass in the ID kind of directly. We have to keep my to-dos, like getting milk tonight after this presentation, very safe and secure. So we want to avoid that naive implementation. So let's take the next step. One path we could take is to, instead of passing back the entire user object, we could, or the user ID, we could pass back an opaque token. And that token could get past the client, and then the token could get past the to-do API. And then at that point, the to-do API needs to talk to the user API to learn, get that user JSON, because it's just a arbitrary token. It doesn't have, the to-do API doesn't have all of the user data. So it's going to call some endpoint and pass in that token, and then the user API is going to get that handed back. So what that does is that solves the problem, the dangerous problem that we discovered previously, where a malicious client can't really do anything with that token. I mean, I guess they could iterate tokens depending on how big the token is, but that's just going to take a long time. It's not as obvious as an ID iteration. So this is a totally valid valid approach. It does have some different features. You have to manage that user token mapping, and every time the to-do API gets that token, unless there's some caching built into the to-do API, it's gonna have to talk to the user API. And kind of the biggest issue that I have with this choice is that it really couples the user API to everything. If your user API goes down, then again, depending on how you've set up caching within the APIs, it's possible that your whole application could fail to work. So JWTs or JOTs come riding into the rescue here. And so in this case, the user data, the client still authenticates with the user API. The user API, instead of generating an opaque token, generates and signs a JOT, which is passed to the client. The client can store that off and pass that JOT up to the to-do API. And the big win here is that the to-do API knows two things about that JOT. One is all the data that's contained within that JOT, which we'll look at the payload later. But because it's been signed by the user API, it's guaranteed that it hasn't been tampered with. So a malicious client can examine a JOT that's been signed, but it can't change anything, or that JOT will fail validation. So you can sign a JOT by using a public-private key pair or a symmetric key, and we'll talk about what path makes sense a little bit later. It is really nice that the to-do API doesn't actually have to talk to the user API. It knows that user API generated that JOT, but it doesn't need to actually call out to validate it. It's self-contained. And then another thing about a JOT, which is kind of better than an opaque token, is that you can it's a JSON object. So you can put kind of arbitrary data in there that you want. Now, again, you shouldn't put secrets in there, because anybody who gets a hold of this JOT can decode it and look at it. So you wouldn't want to put, passwords or anything in it, but you can put like business type of data, what roles someone has, other things that you wouldn't care if someone saw, but you want the APIs to know. So here's a JOT. We will be taking this apart, but there are three components. There's the metadata, the header in green, there's the payload in blue, and then there's the signature in tan. So let's kind of take a look at each of these pieces. So the header And by the way, each of these is URL encoded. Sorry, base64 encoded, and they're just separated by periods. So if you took each of these pieces alone and just put it into a normal base64 decoder, you could see the contents of it. I guess the signature would be a bunch of weird stuff, but the other two pieces you could see. So the header has metadata, right? In this particular case, it's what algorithm was used to sign the JOT. There's other things you can put in there, like the type of JOT it is. And then in some cases, the key that was used to sign it. The payload is where things get interesting. And so there are, this is called, the keys of this JSON object are called the claims. They had to come up with some other word rather than use the word key, but these are basically things that the JOT is asserting about the user. And so some claims are standardized and are defined in the RFC, other claims are not. These first four are standardized. ISS is the issuer, EXP is the expiration time, AUD is the audience, which is basically who this JOT is for, and sub is subject or who this JOT is about. And then name and roles are not standardized. So the issuer is who built the JOT, expiration is when it expires, the audience is who the JOT is for, and the subject is who the JOT is about. And then you get a signature here, which can be, you can use a variety of different algorithms. The main kind of determinant here is what your client libraries support, and then performance matters too. And then the other kind of major dimension is public-private versus symmetric. And that's really about sharing secrets. But again, we'll talk about that a little bit further along. So at the end of the day, the To API gets this JOT, can pull out the user ID, and can actually run this query, right? Because they couldn't do this before because it didn't really have a user ID before. We're going to skip questions. Sorry, I forgot to take this slide out. So let's kind of talk about some issues with JOTs, right? As soon as, if you ever read any JOT posts on Reddit or Hacker News or any other kind of sites, except for probably the forums for Atlanta PHP, those are probably nice. But any place where people are harsh online, as soon as you post anything about JOTs, the people come out of the woodwork and say, oh, they're insecure, they're horrible, you should never use them. And I will say they're complicated. And they're complicated because it's a kind of a decent sized spec, and they were trying to meet all the use cases. So it's very easy to build a secure JOT if you kind of follow some guardrails. So the first one is use a library. And there's no reason at all in PHP or any other major language that you should be writing your own code to decode JOTs. I have not encountered a major library yet that didn't have a great open source option. The other thing you want to do is make sure you verify those claims, and not just the fact that the signature was valid or that the JOT hadn't expired, but also that it was issued by who you thought it was issued by or who you expect. And then also that you were part of the audience, right? Because someone could conceivably create a JOT and or find a JOT from some other situation and maliciously present it to you, and then you might process it, but it wasn't really meant for you. So really easy, just make sure that you do a quick check, and I'll show you some PHP code to do that check in a little while. When you're creating a JOT, realize one of the great things about it is they can contain arbitrary JSON data. One of the bad things about it is that it can contain arbitrary JSON data. So realize that it is like a postcard, right? There's no secrets. Anybody who gets a hold of this JOT can decode it and see what's in there. Now there is a standard, I think it's called Jose or JOSE, which is about encrypting JOTs, but that's not typically what I've seen. Usually it's much more the signature is there. So I just want to repeat that. JOTs are not encrypted, they're signed. So that means that you can tell that the contents are unchanged from when they were created, but they're not secret. So just want to reemphasize that because that's a big foot gun. And then the last one is that if you use a symmetric signing algorithm like HMAC, you want to make sure the key is long and strange. Otherwise, you can be vulnerable to brute forcing. You also want to, so JOTs are often used as an access token in OAuth systems. And so when that happens, you want to make sure you store it carefully. So again, because these are bearer tokens and they can be presented to APIs, and it's very similar to having the key to a car, right? If you have a key to a car and you walk up to that car, the car is going to turn on, the doors are going to open for you. It doesn't know who you are. So it's not tied to you in any way. Again, there are standards out there for creating JOTs that are tied to certain clients, but they're not as widespread as we would like. So that means that if bad actor over here gets a hold of my JOT, they can present it to the to-do API, which will then go ahead and look at my to-dos and hand them right back to the bad actor. So be careful with your JOTs, store them safely. If possible, store them server-side and then just have a session out to the clients. We realize that sometimes that isn't possible. So if you're going to send it down to a browser, then you want to store this token in an HTTP-only cookie to avoid malicious JavaScript from examining it and sending it off someplace, or trying to, basically stealing it. If you're going to use a JOT in a mobile client, right, because mobile clients, native applications often interact with APIs, make sure you store it in secure storage, right? The keychain on iOS or Android secure storage. Another major major issue with JOTs is the none signing algorithm. And so the JWT specification allows you to specify that a JOT is signed with the none algorithm. That means that no signature is required. So it turns a JOT from looking like this, right, with the green header and the blue payload and the red signature, to this. So the payload stays the same. If you're quick, you may have seen that the header changed a little bit, but there's this third section is just not there. There's no signature. So what that looks like in practice is that you change the algorithm from the signing algorithm to none, and the payload remains the same. So the problem with this is that if you accept JOTs, if you as a consumer of a JOT accept JOTs that aren't signed, that means anybody who finds your endpoint can craft a JOT without you knowing where it came from. So a bad actor can create a JOT that gives Dan Moore an admin role or a super admin role, and you as a consumer would look at that and say, "Oh, cool, my JOT's totally fine. Like I don't care where it's from. It's not signed." The specification allows this, and the simple fix is just don't allow none. So if you are decoding a JOT and you see the algorithm in that metadata header is none, just throw up your hands and refuse the request, right? That's a 403 or a 404, whatever kind of the standard thing you have, the standard status code you've decided on for a malformed request. Maybe it's 400, but just don't ever allow it. Now, of course, I'm a consultant, or I have been a consultant in the past. Logan mentioned my kind of wide sphere of experience, and a consultant's answer is, if someone asks them a question, straight up yes or no question, is always it depends. So this was put in the spec for a reason, not to introduce a big security hole. And the reason is that if you have some other way to verify that your JOT is unchanged, whether that's network isolation, client certificates, mutual TLS, which is another IATF standard, and so that's one precondition. And the second one is the need to generate JOTs and to decode them is so performance intensive or performance sensitive that you can't possibly sign it. Those are the two preconditions where I would say algorithm none might actually make sense. Now, if you're in that boat, you're probably a little more of an expert in JOTs than and you're probably more of an expert in JOTs, and you're probably not coming to an intro to JWT talk at Merge PHP. But I just want to say that it is out there. But the simplest thing is just to say, don't ever process a JOT that hasn't been properly signed. So I've kind of alluded to this a couple of times. You can sign a JOT not just with a symmetric key, but with a public-private key pair. And let's talk a little bit about why you want to do that. The nice thing about public-private key pairs is that there's no shared secret. So think back to the to-do API. In order for the to API to verify, if it's a symmetric signing algorithm, in order for the to-do API to verify that the user API signed it, they both need to have a shared secret. Now, in a small world, in a small application, that may make total sense, right? It's very easy if you're deploying to Heroku or DigitalOcean, and you have 2 or 3 services. It's very easy for you to just have an environment variable that's your shared secret, and every service gets it, and it's part of the deploy process. You can rotate it fairly easily across a number of services. But if you start to scale organizationally and you have multiple teams that are building APIs that consume a JOT, and you have another team that's like building the user API that's generating the JOT, coordinating rotation of keys may be problematic, and it can even scale outside of an organization. So you may have one organization that provides the JOTs and another organization that actually consumes them. And in that case, it becomes a real pain to share a secret. The other issue is that when you have a shared secret, the user API signs a JOT with the random string, and the to API verifies the JOT, right? Validates it that was properly signed. But because it is a symmetric algorithm, the to-do API can generate a JOT that is indistinguishable from one generated by the user API. And so again, in a small system, that may be a totally acceptable trade-off. In a larger system, that is probably a no-no. The other thing that you get with public-private key pairs is it's a little bit easier to rotate your keys. Now, there isn't any such thing as a free lunch, and so public-private key pairs are more complicated to understand, although there's definitely some tooling around it, and they're a little bit slower. Well, they are definitely slower. I think I did some tests. This was months ago, but I did some tests, and it depended on whether you were signing or verifying, but they were on the order of 5 times slower. So again, if performance is a really key attribute and you've benchmarked to make sure that the issue isn't the database or the network traffic or any other multiple things that it could be, it's actually the JOT signing or verifying, then consider going with a symmetric solution. So here is how you would actually do this with a RSA key pair. Again, RSA is one of the algorithms that's supported, so is elliptic curve cryptography. And that what's supported depends on your user API and your to API. It's not, and the libraries you're using to generate your JOTs. It's not like defined in the specification what the various signing algorithms are. So we have the user API, which generates the JOT, and it signs it with its private key pair, gets past the client. The client then presents the JOT to the to-do API, and the to API, to be able to make sure this is a valid JOT, needs the public key pair, or the public key. And so it may have it locally, or it may need to reach out to the user API. And there's actually, this is a FusionAuth specific API call, but there's actually some standard ones too. JWKS is the standard, and basically the user API can publish their key pairs to the to a known endpoint, and then the to API can just go out there and check it periodically. Now you may say, Dan, I thought the whole point of JOTs is that the to API didn't have to talk to the user API, and I will submit to you that the amount of entangling between this, where you're basically calling out once in a while to get a public key pair or to get a public key to validate a jot, is much less than every time I get a token, I need to call the user API. But you're right, there is some level of entanglement there. This is what that key might look like in the JSON. And if you have multiple keys, again, this is nice because you can have keys segmented on time. You have keys segmented on different departments, different levels of functionality. JOTs don't care. But as part of the header, you specify which key was used to sign this JOT. And then in the public key list that the user API publishes, you can see there's the ID that's revealed. And then the validator can look at the JOT, look at the header, pull down the appropriate public key, and then make sure to validate it. So you could see that if you're trying to rotate keys regularly, that would be really helpful, because you would basically start out signing things with key 42, decide you need to rotate your key for security purposes, and then you go to key 145 or whatever. And as long as you keep both public keys up for as long as those initial JOTs were created for, you're not going to have any issues with the JOTs being validated. So let's talk about refresh tokens. So JOTs really are meant to be short-lived, minutes, maybe hours. Refresh tokens are long-lived, and they're very similar to the way that, well, no, actually, I won't go into that. But the nice thing about a refresh token is that it can be used to mint new JOTs. Let's see how that looks. In a couple of slides, we'll examine that. But refresh tokens are this way to compromise between the user being forced to authenticate regularly, which is what would happen if you had no refresh tokens and a very short-lived JOT, which obviously that's not a great user experience, right? Every time your JOT expires, it lasts for 5 minutes. When you go to get to-dos, after that 5-minute period, you're sent back to the user API to authenticate. That's not great. But the other issue is that you could say, okay, heck with this, I'm gonna have my JOTs live for 24 hours or for 5 weeks or for a year. And then the issue with that is that anybody who finds that JOT, who gets it, right, whether they're examining the cookies in your browser session, or they man the middle attack you, or a JOT is passed in a query string accidentally and it goes into a log someplace, that JOT is now can be used, right? It's just like if I had a key and I left it outside, that is going to be more of a security risk than if I have a key card at a hotel that they can turn off, right? So how does this work? Well, the user API generates both a JOT and a refresh token, and then sends it down to the client. The client holds on to the refresh token and passes the JOT to the to-do API. The to-do API examines the JOT, says, oh, yep, you're valid. Awesome. Great. You haven't expired. You're for me. You're from the issuer, I expect. And you're about the person. Awesome. I'm going to get you their to-dos. And that happens a couple of times. Let's say the JOT is good for 5 minutes. At the end of 5 minutes, the to-do API, or the client, passes the JOT to the to-do API. The to-do API says, whoa, hello, no, thank you. This is an expired JOT. This is no good for me. And hands back a 403 or whatever error makes sense. The client then can catch that and say, oh gosh, my JOT is no good. Well, I'm going to try to get a new one. And it will take this refresh token and pass it back to the user API. The user API can, depending on how it's configured, say, okay, yes, this is still a valid refresh token. The user's not revoked this. And so I'm going to create a new JOT, good for another 5 minutes. Passes the back to the client. The client can then present that to the to-do API. The to-do API is satisfied and everything's good. So That's kind of how the mechanics of a refresh token would work. If you are deleting users in a monolithic application, you would typically do this, right? You would say on delete cascade. Well, you don't really have that aspect of that availability when you're building a distributed system like we've been examining. So there is no on delete cascade. And so you got to figure out, well, how am I going to do this? You have two options, really. You can push the complexity of the client and make the client call delete on every API. If a user says, hey, I want my account gone, or I'm removing this application from my phone, then you need to make sure that you can delete all that data, especially if you have any customers in the EU or in California. So you could force the client to do the deletes. That's not great because it works okay with 2 APIs, but what if there's 10 APIs? What if there's 20 APIs? What if you have a client that you release and then you release another API and someone hasn't updated their client, and when they delete the application, it forgets to call delete on that, email API or whatever the other API is. So the better choice here is to use webhooks, and that is going to cause the client will have to still call one delete call, right, to the user API, but any other API that is interested in knowing about users being deleted can register for that webhook, and then it can do whatever cleanup it needs to do. As far as logging out, really in JOT-based systems, you're really limited to revoking a refresh token. So you cannot, and we'll talk about this in more depth, but you can't really revoke JSON Web Tokens. So how does this work in practice? When the user logs out from this client, they say, log me out. I'm going to delete the JOT. I'm going to delete the refresh token. They call up to the user API. They say, hey, this refresh token is no longer valid. If you're presented with this refresh token, don't give a new JOT. Don't mint a new JOT. And you'll see that like the JOT could still be floating around, right? And could still be presented to the to-do API. And that's called foreshadowing. I'm gonna lead into that in a little bit. If you have multiple different services, make sure that you revoke all the refresh tokens, because you could conceivably have multiple refresh tokens. So can you revoke JOTs? The answer is no, really, but you can take some steps kind of around it. So if a user's account's been breached, you could rotate the keys, right? And so in that case, you could, that would immediately invalidate those JOTs because, well, it would invalidate those JOTs. Depends on whether the public keys are cached or how that happens. But it's going to kind of be a broad revocation, right? It's going to revoke every JOT that was signed with those keys. And again, if it's an admin account that's been compromised, maybe that's a good thing to do. It's kind of a big lift. Another option is what we call the time window solution. And so the idea is that just as you can register for webhooks for a user being deleted, you can also create webhooks for a user signing out. And so in that case, we're actually starting to push some state back into the API, into the to-do API, so that it will know when a user has logged out, and then it can look at all of the JOTs that it's presented with, and if it sees a JOT that is for that user who has logged out, it can refuse it. So you're basically pushing state into the to-do API via a webhook. So let's see how this would work. Imagine it's December 9th, maybe there's snow on the ground, who knows, and we create JOTs that are good for 30 minutes, and it's 1:12:47. A new JOT created right now will expire in 30 minutes. That means that a JOT created 1 second ago will expire at 1:42:46. So if we have a situation where we want all the JOTs for a given user to be invalid at if they were created at 142, sorry, 112:47 or before, then we can look at that JOT expiration time and say, okay, if it was created before this time, it's invalid, right? So you just basically add that 30 minutes. So yeah, so basically we're kind of dealing with this this red zone, which is what we were worried about because we don't have a way to expire JOTs automatically. So what we're doing is we're saying if it was created at 112:47, it will expire, or if it was created in the blue zone, it will expire somewhere in the red zone, and that's what we want to ignore. Those are the JOTs that we don't want to accept. So let me share some code real quick. Stop share. All right. So this is open source code. An open source repo. I have the link in the at the end of the slide deck. But I basically created a number of different JBOT signature examples. So if we go here, so this is just HMAC. So you can see I'm using the Firebase JOT library, and I have a key here. This is a horrible key. Don't use this kind of key. It's very small and likely to be able to be brute forced. This is a typical payload, right? So I have my claims here, and I can encode that with the key. And so we're pretending that this lines 8 through 22 are the user API, right, where the JOT is being generated. And then lines 23 through the end are the to API, where I'm actually decoding it. So let's go ahead, and you can see that this is the JOT that I created. So this is what will get passed around, and it's URL. It's a base64 encoded so that it can be put in headers and whatnot. But this is what comes out of the decode method call. Let's go ahead and look at another one. So this is a slightly better situation, kind of the same. Let's change this to just fusion.io. So this is basically the user side, same things are happening, right? But on the to-do side, I'm a little more responsible. So I am going to make sure that I basically pass this by configuration. I'm going to make sure on line 26 that the issuer was fusion.io and the audience is this GUID. So let's go ahead and run this. PHP. Everything's great. Awesome. Let's go ahead and say that someone somehow changes the expected audience to a different value. They found a JOT lying around that has that, and they're trying to be sinister. So if we do this, you can see that on line 34, I am checking the audience. So this is a key part of any JOT-based system, is that you have to be a responsible consumer. You can't just trust an auth server, whether that's Fusion Auth or any of the other ones out there, Auth0, Okta, Keycloak, whatever. You need to be a responsible consumer. And then the last one I want to show you is this, which is just RSA. So typically you're not going to have the RSA private key and public key embedded in your program. This is really more for just purposes of illustration. You're typically going to have them be managed outside of the situation, but you're just encoding it with the private key on line 44, and you're saying, hey, this is using RSA 256, and you're kind of doing the reverse on line 49. So that is there, and this is Apache license code. Like I said, it will be in the presentation. I'm happy to send that over to the organizers or post in the meetup, and you can download it and play around with it. You need to have Composer and what version of PHP do I have? I have 7.3. All right, so that concludes the code, and I have a few more slides, and then we'll be done. I know we got a little bit of late start, so I appreciate your all's patience. All right. So as far as JOTs and PHP, I think that you really want to think about what you're trying to accomplish. If you're just generating parsing JOTs, right? Maybe you're using something else to create JOTs, or you just want to play around with it, then I would use the Firebase PHP JOT package. I haven't done an exhaustive search. That was kind of the one that some Googling found, and that's the one I've used. There may be others out there, but definitely try to find a library. As far as authorization, I think it really depends on which framework you're using. I noticed that there's a JWT auth guard for Laravel, and that WordPress has a plugin. There's a profusion of different frameworks. So I would definitely, if I was going to consume a JOT from some identity provider or someplace that made JOTs for me, and I was using a framework, I would search for, JWT auth, Symfony or whatever it is, and see whether you can find something. All of these plugins probably will have you look at the claims. And just again, I just want to emphasize, make sure you verify the claims that are coming in if you're consuming, if you're protecting resources and using JOTs for authorization. Here's some tools. As promised, the code that I went through is right here, second line. This JWT debugger is there's probably hundreds of JWT debuggers out there. You can cut and paste the JOTs that you create here into those online debuggers. And I just include that to emphasize that it is like a postcard, right? I've said that before, but there's no secrets in a JOT if someone can get a hold of it. And then the last article is just something I wrote last year, talks about how to build a secure JOT from various points of view, right? What you should do as a client, what you should do as a creator of a JOT, what you should do as a consumer. And that's it. So I want to thank you all for your time today. And I am happy to take some questions if we have any. So thank you.
Awesome. Thanks very much for the talk, Dan. That was good. I haven't done a ton of work with JOTs, but there was a lot of very active discussion in YouTube here. So just give us a minute to go through the questions. If you have the link handy to the GitHub, I think you can type an answer to one of the existing questions and post the link in Zoom, and then we can get that link over to YouTube as well.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll do. I just responded to Roland's comment with the link because I couldn't figure out how to do it.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That works.
Yeah.
Awesome. And it looks like there, do you see Mike, there's another question from YouTube there on Mike Stratton posted in Zoom.
Should I answer Mike's question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, cool. So Mike's question is thoughts on JWE for protecting little bits of secret data in the JOT payload. I have not used that, so I think that that's probably a valid solution. Again, it kind of depends on whether your libraries and whatnot support that. Another thing you could do, I mean, I guess I would just think long and hard about like why you're putting secrets into clients' hands. And I get sometimes there's necessity for that, but I would just think long and hard about that.
Any other questions for Dan?
Thanks, Ian, for the question.
So you recommend rotating the keys out on like a minute basis, not like a per request basis?
So JOTs themselves will expire, right? So you don't need to rotate the keys to have them expire. That's what that EXP claim is.
Oh, the date. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, as far as rotating keys, I think you really need to like decide what your security posture is, and an e-commerce site is going to have a different need than a bank, which is going to have a different need than like a brochure site. So I don't really have any concrete recommendations on how often you should rotate keys, but I will say you should plan to do that. You should figure out a way to do that so you aren't trying to figure it out during an emergency.
Yeah, like have a plan in place. And using public-private keys, having that ability to rotate keys, like here's the current one, and then here's the new one,
Yep.
like that's going to be handy for that. So I had one question on the AOD and SUB claims. Can you go into a little bit more detail on the format of those? Are those just like, is that written into the spec? Or like, does it have to be like a UUID, or can it be just like an integer, or
Sure.
It can be whatever you want?
Sure. Great question. So the meanings of AUD and SUB and ISS are specified in the spec. The actual representations, other than them being a string, or AUD can be a string or an array of strings, are not specified. The EXP is always going to be a timestamp. But yeah, so we use GWIDs because, again, it's leaky data. So if you use ints, which you totally can,
yeah,
you're just revealing that, in a normal system, if you have an int that says 128 is the S subclaim, then people might be like, I wonder what 127 is, right? But you can totally do that. And again, JOTs are super flexible and super powerful, and they give you enough kind of suggestion. They give you enough power that you can make dumb mistakes. But there may be a situation where ints are a better option, and you could use, yeah. So I guess I don't want to be a dead horse. GWIDs are what we recommend and what FusionAuth uses, but the ISS doesn't have to be a domain name either, right? That's just what we tend to use, but it can be any string. So Mike asks, what are the benefits of using a JOT over JSON if you're using session tokens and refresh tokens and encryption with JSON? So when you're saying JSON, do you mean like you're just like building your own like structure and passing that around, Mike? Is that what you're? Yeah, I guess I'm just not sure I understand the question.
There might be a delay too if we're watching on YouTube, so just give him
Fair.
a minute.
Fair. Gotcha. Well, so there's a lot of similarities there, right? I mean, if you're using, so I'm not sure so there's a lot of similarities there. The benefits of using JOTs, I would say in that case, are you can rely on libraries rather than rolling your own JSON encryption and whatnot, right? You can use libraries that, for instance, will check to see that the expiration time hasn't happened. There's another claim that lets you say this JOT is not valid before 5 minutes from now or an hour from now. And there are libraries that will basically do that validation for you. So I would say that you're getting a lot of the same benefits in terms of the complex data structures you can put in, but you're losing out on the libraries.
Trying to go through the chat log here.
Mike, let me know if I didn't answer that question, or if I misunderstood it. Please.
Another question that I had, I guess, was are refresh tokens also known as API keys, or is that like a separate thing?
Great, that's a good question. They are not, like, the format of them is not defined by any specification as far as I know. They just are kind of arbitrary strings of text. I wouldn't call them API keys, because the thing about an API key is that it's like it's good for all time, right? Like, you give someone an API key and they can use that repeatedly, whereas refresh tokens are really tied to that session of the user being logged in. And so they tend to be generated when the user gets authenticated, as I showed in that diagram, and then passed around. So they're not as long-lived as API keys. Okay.
And it's not like the same thing as like a application specific password or something, right? Like that's like sometimes like Google and some other places will generate like application specific passwords, but refresh tokens are meant to be used specifically like in JWT. So I was getting a little confused when I'm thinking about it.
Yeah. So you could imagine, an API key gives you kind of unlimited access, right? Whereas the refresh tokens plus JOTs give you limited access, right? It's either limited in terms of time or with the JOT, or it's limited in terms of a session length. So they probably play nicely with API keys, and you could conceivably kind of mix them together, right? That could be the way that you authenticate to get the refresh token. But the nice thing about the refresh tokens and JOTs being less long-lived and less powerful means that you can kind of hand them to clients that you might not trust as much, or that send them in places that you wouldn't want to necessarily send an API key.
Makes sense. That might be the end of the questions. Right. I think. Bobby, did you see any other questions there?
Well, I appreciate the questions and I appreciate the time. I really do.
Yeah, thank you so much. Do you get a lot of snow in Denver? Are you in Denver or Boulder or somewhere near there?
I'm in Boulder. We got a little bit of snow, but it got so windy the other day that it's all kind of blown away. So we're doing all right. The scary is wish we had more snow. I'll be honest with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a little different probably in the mountains, but yeah.
Yeah.
There's one more question in the chat if you got a second.
Of course.
Ian asked, refresh tokens are implemented as opaque tokens in Fusion Auth's case, right?
That is correct. I like that. That was an easy question. Thank you, Ian. Yeah, I honestly, I mean, I've read the OAuth spec and I've read I've scanned the bearer token spec and I've read the JWT spec, and I don't, it's always sketchy to like industrial spec back and forth, but I don't know if refresh tokens have any kind of fixed requirement in terms of like what they look like. Honestly, access tokens don't in OAuth 2 either. In OIDC, they need to be JOTs, but in OAuth 2, they could be anything. It just seems to be that JOTs have won out, and JOTs are how it is. But you could do OAuth 2 with Passetto tokens, which is a different kind of token, or opaque strings if you wanted to, and still be OAuth 2 compliant, for what it's worth.
The Wild West of token land.
So that's actually something that might be interesting to you all. There's actually a spec called OAuth 2.1, which is in progress. And basically they said, well, OAuth 2 is basically 8 or 9 years old. It was formalized in 2012, and there have been a few changes in the world since then, in the tech world. And so they've actually kind of codified some things, and they're deprecating some of the flows and whatnot. So if you deal with OAuth, I would definitely check out OAuth 2.1, just Google for it. And the spec is out there, and it's no breaking changes. Just going to be like, here's some things that we really think you should do based on 8 or 9 years of security best practices and whatnot. So, yeah.
Awesome.
Cool.
Things to keep it keep a lookout for. So everything's always constantly changing. That's the purpose of these meetups. You got to stay up to date with everything that's going on. So I think the study sessions, maybe Gene can put together, like API authentication study session. I think that would be a good little session. I'm giving Gene things to do here, but yeah, it's, we're constantly building APIs and consuming them, but it's good to like dive into the nitty gritty and understand how they work. So if anyone's interested in giving a talk, we're definitely always looking for speakers. Get a hold of one of your organizers here, and we can get you set up here. This at some point this year. I think we've got February figured out, and February it looks like it isn't happening on Valentine's, which has happened in the past. So no conflict next month, but I've got a good talk set up for February, and looking forward to more good talks here from Merge PHP in 2021. Thank you so much, Dan, for the talk. Really appreciate this month. If you want to hang out, we'll probably be in the YouTube chat for a little while longer after the call. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm actually probably going to head off to dinner with my kids, but really appreciate that chance and the great questions. So thank you all.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks a lot, Dan.